This is Andrew Huberman,
the internet's favorite neuroscientist.
Andrew Huberman.
Andrew Huberman.
Andrew Huberman.
And so the idea is to have a set of podcasts that you can come to, mine if you like, David's if you like. Well, let's talk to a world expert in that.
My guest today is Dr. Andrew Huberman.
Good morning. You can tell the title of today's video. I'm doing Andrew Huberman's famous morning routine.
I'm Andrew Huberman, and I'm a professor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at Stanford School of Medicine. Or something. I only know what I know, and I know academics, I know science, and I know medicine. And so that's what I'm going to bring to the table.
So how did Andrew Huberman become worth $5 million? Hi, my name is Laura. I am a data-led content marketer for professionals in higher education. My past work was as a business analyst and a behavioral design consultant for clients like Amazon Devices, Rolls-Royce, and Aviva. So today we're going to be going through how Andrew Huberman got to that $5 million through his marketing strategy. We're going to be looking at everything from his offer to his funnel to his customers, the business model, what he leveraged to get there, and his social media strategy. Hopefully, through this, you're able to take ideas from Andrew Huberman's strategy to apply to your own mission to further whatever you want to put out into the world. So without further ado, let's get into it. So in order to understand how Andrew Huberman got to where he is, we need to go back in time. The story actually starts somewhere around 2019, where he was introduced to someone named Robert Moore. And what was important about Robert Moore is they became friends, and then when the pandemic hit, Andrew Huberman decided that he was really not happy with the quality of information getting to consumers around their health. So Robert Moore actually introduced him to different podcasters, and he started to go onto some of the biggest podcasts in the world, like Joe Rogan, Rich Roll. I'm pretty sure the Rich Roll podcast has something like 15 million views on it, which is crazy. And then by 2020, yes, he appeared on Lex Fridman's podcast. He actually has a quote, a little clip about this. I'm going to play it because it's really cute.
I should mention that this is episode 100 of the Huberman Lab podcast, and I would be remiss if I did not tell you that there would be no Huberman Lab podcast were it not for Lex Fridman. I was a fan of the Lex Fridman podcast long before I was ever invited onto the podcast as a guest. And after our first recording, Lex was the one that suggested that I start a podcast. He only gave me two pieces of advice. The first piece of advice was start a podcast. And the second piece of advice was that I not just make it me blabbing into the microphone and staring at the camera. So I can safely say that I at least followed half of his advice, and that I am ever grateful for Lex, both as a friend, a colleague in science, and now fellow podcaster, for making the suggestion that we start this podcast. I already mentioned a few of the topics covered on today's podcast, but
Anyways, so as you heard him say in that clip, Lex Fridman is actually the one who encouraged him to start the Huberman Lab podcast. Obviously not in the way that he actually ended up executing, which is 2 hours staring straight at a camera, but started a podcast nonetheless. And that was in 2021. Since then, he's been carrying on with the podcast. He started doing more things like live shows. He started podcasts for other people as well. And now he has 2 book deals. So you can see how his media empire over time just kind of escalated. And now we're going to talk about how he got there in the first place. So the first thing I want to talk about is Andrew Huberman's niche. So when we think about niches, I like to niche down 4 levels. But the first level is always things that pretty much everyone wants. So level 1 is either health, wealth, or relationships. I feel like I can't spell today. Relationships. I literally made it to the 8th grade spelling bee on faith. I really don't understand. Anyways, these are 3 things that pretty much everyone wants, right? So that's always level 1 of your niche. And then within there, I'm going to put it on the screen as well, we get a little bit more specific. Now where Andrew Huberman started out, his level 1 was health, because that was his main mission. That was the thing that he was upset about when it came to consumers and how empowered they were with the information that was currently out there. So his level 1 was health. Just to make that a little bit more legible. And then you get into level 2. I would say that it was around health, like education. And then if you get to level 3, I think it would be like performance, optimization, and then level 4 would just be like academic research. When you get past like that, that's kind of subjective, but to me, he has a very niche audience who is obsessed with optimizing their performance, and they really value high quality information. So that's why I've niched it down in this way. And clearly there are also people who like to learn about things. So that to me is Andrew Huberman's niche. So now that we understand Andrew Huberman's niche, I want to talk about Andrew Huberman's offer. And his offer is quite interesting because his entire mission is to create no cost to consumer information. And I believe his tagline is like science-based tools for everyday life, right? So when it comes to his offer, I find the way that he structured this out interesting because obviously where he is now, he does have memberships, etc. But when he started the podcast, he was making content for people like you and me. He was making free content for the consumer. But the way that his media business model works, and this is a lot like TV, we were the ones watching the content, but his customer are his sponsors. So his offer to us is free content that's valued around, let's say, like $1,200 an hour, because that's the average tuition kind of price, how it works out at Stanford, right? So he's offering us an insane amount of value, but the people who he's getting money from are the sponsors. And what he is offering them is us. It's the same way that Facebook works. So when you're getting something for free, just always know you are the product. So I came over to my desk because I want to tell you about this book, Don't Trust Your Gut, by Seth Stevens Davidowitz. And the reason I want to bring up that is because I want to talk about the concept of leverage. Because Andrew Huberman didn't just start a podcast, right? He, first of all, was pretty much a rock star neuroscientist. There was a Times article where someone else in the neuroscience field literally said, he is a rock star in our field. So he already had an amazing reputation as someone who is very academically sound. Like, he already worked at Stanford University. And something that this book talks about is when entrepreneurs are going into a new venture, it's much smarter for them to pick something that they already have experience in. And so I also thought it was very smart how he leveraged a podcast based on his podcast guest experience and the mentors that he had. This is a good book. Anyways. So with Andrew Huberman's leverage, he was much more likely to be successful because he picked a podcast, a medium where he had a lot of high quality friends, a lot of really good connections, and something that he knew about. He picked to go over academic studies. Again, something that he's very skilled in and really knows how to talk about. And he chose a format that was 2 hours staring at a camera. You know who would be really good at that? A university professor who stares at students for 2 hours in lectures. So whatever skills that you have, think about what you can leverage in order to create content that's as good as possible, as easy as possible. So like I said, Andrew Huberman was making content for people like you and people like me. And the thing that Andrew Huberman does exceptionally well is he has a very low give to ask ratio. And this is something I want to call to your attention because once I say it, I hope you get a little like, in your head. So a give to ask ratio is basically how much you give to people in order to ask for something back. And that just kind of means in the media world, I don't know what that bubble is. In the media world, that just means kind of how many ads do you have for however long you're actually entertaining people. And something that Facebook found is the ideal give to ask ratio is something around 4:1. So that means that for every 4 posts, they can give you 1 ad. You can see this in TV shows as well. So every 47 minutes of content will have 13 minutes of ads. But Andrew Huberman, and I measured this on one of his episodes, he had about 4 minutes of ads for over 2 hours of content, which means that his give to ask ratio, super, super generous. Even now, even when he's established, even when people would probably put up with a lot more ads throughout the episode. Now I'm going to go through the sales funnels that Andrew Huberman uses. But in order to understand what I'm talking about within the sales funnels, I want to talk first about the core 4. And the core 4 comes from Alex Hormozi's $100 million leads training. Like I said, everything will be linked in the description. But these are basically the 4 ways that you can get leads, which is basically people to buy or consume your stuff. And obviously, like I said, there are kind of 2 things going on here. There is the consumer side, which is us, how he gets us to see his stuff. And then there's also the sponsorship side. So I'm going to explain both of those sales funnels, but first I need to explain this. So the 4 ways that you can get leads are as follows. You've got cold outreach, which is reaching out to people you don't know. Warm outreach, which is reaching out to people you do know. Paid ads, obvious. Content, which are things like social media, the podcast, etc. Obviously, there are other ways to get leads. For example, if someone talks about your service, that's word of mouth, and then PR as well. But these core 4 things are what you're most in control of. So now that you understand the core 4, I'm going to run through the 2 different marketing funnels. So the first one is us, the consumer, and how we find him in the first place, which is the attention sort of phase, which just means how we first notice him. We would either notice him as either a podcast guest on an existing episode of a different podcast, or maybe we'd see him on an explore page, or we'd find his social clips, anything like that would be the top of funnel kind of activities. And then as you move down, you would find people who regularly consume his content on a schedule. Maybe they subscribe, some sort of commitment there. And then you've got people who kind of become a fan. Maybe they go onto his website, download a lead magnet, all that sort of stuff. And then at the bottom of the funnel, you've got the loyal fans who kind of will buy anything that he sells. In the bottom 2 levels, you have people who start to buy stuff. So whether they buy his book or become a member, or even maybe someone at the bottom of the funnel would be so loyal they would go work for a sponsored company, just be like, I want to work with Andrew Huberman. But that's kind of the cycle of a consumer funnel. So whether they buy his book or become a
why your business should have a membership model. Let's take Costco. Costco charges you $60 a year to be a member. You spend on average $100 per cart size. You spend $3,000 a year at Costco as an average member. You'd think they make all their money here. Well, you'd be wrong, because actually they just decrease the prices here so that you find value in this. And this is all net profit, meaning money in your pocket. The cool part about this, it's reoccurring, it's predictable, and they don't need you to spend as much here for them to get additional value. The question you need to ask yourself is, are you bigger than Costco? And if not, you probably need a membership model.
And then if we look at the sponsorship funnel, now obviously I don't have behind the scenes information on how he gets sponsors, right? I think that honestly, what happens is it's more of a warm outreach thing for him. Maybe at first he just cold outreach to some companies that he really liked and showed his social media following, etc. But for the most part, I imagine that he's reaching out to people that he already knows, or perhaps they're coming to him and they see his content. So then you've got the sponsorship talks in the middle, which obviously I don't know how that is handled. I imagine because of the value exchange, which is just money for a high following, it's probably just a Zoom call. Sometimes people with less established reputations, or when there's more of a contract on the line, they'll take people to dinner. They'll use more salesy tactics, but I think for them it's just a win-win situation. They probably just do a Zoom call at this point, and then you've got your sponsors and your long-term sponsors as well. So those are the 2 funnels that people walk through in Andrew Huberman stuff. And it's important to remember that the reason he's able to more easily get people through the sponsorship funnel is because he pays a lot of attention to the consumer funnel, which is us. Something, I forget who said this, but attention is the most important thing that you can get from people. So please don't waste it. I will try not to waste yours. But once you have people's attention, that is so important to keep it and do a good job of making sure that you provide them with quality and value. Next, we're going to go through how Andrew Huberman uses media, and we're going to use the PESO model for this. So that's paid media, earned media, shared media, and owned media. So paid media would be things like paid ads. And like I said before, I really can't find any evidence of Andrew Huberman using paid ads. I've got it up right here on my laptop. I use this website called SimilarWeb, which shows how traffic is driven to a website. I couldn't find any evidence of him using paid ads. Maybe he has to promote the podcast before. I can't say for sure, but honestly, I think that everything he does is organic, which that's pretty cool. And then in terms of earned media, this is stuff like PR. So for example, like when he had that 5 girlfriend thing come out, that would be an example of earned media. Maybe not a form of earned media that he liked, but definitely something that got the word out there. He's also mentioned in like the Times, not the Times, he's Time Magazine. That's very different. He was mentioned in Time Magazine. And there are also a bunch of different YouTubers who always make different videos about his morning routine and his practices. So those would all be forms of earned media. Next would be shared media. So that's stuff like when he guests on different podcasts, or if he does like a shared paper with someone, shared blog post. Obviously he guests on a lot of different podcasts, so that's probably his primary form of shared media. But yeah, he does use that for sure. And then last is his own media, which is just his different social channels. He's got pretty much every social channel under the sun. Most of the traffic from his website is driven through, as you can see on the screen, YouTube and then Twitter, which is funny because he really hasn't posted on Twitter since 2023. LinkedIn, Reddit, and then Instagram, which I find is quite interesting. But he's very, very active on Instagram. That's probably the one he's most active on. I'm not sure how familiar those of you watching are with Robert Cialdini's work, but his stuff on influence is so interesting, especially if you're into sales. And he's got basically 6 methods of influence. So he's got reciprocity, commitment and consistency, authority, likeness, what else? Social proof, and urgency and scarcity. And I just want to go through how Andrew Huberman uses each of these elements, and I'll explain them a little bit as well. So the first one is reciprocity. So reciprocity is like when you give someone something, or when someone gives you something and you just have that thing inside of you. I mean, if you're a decent person, if you're not a decent person, you won't understand. But anyways, when you give someone something and then, or when someone gives you something and then you're like, you have this thing inside you that makes you want to give something back. So by Andrew Huberman, for example, giving us a free podcast, it makes us want to like him. It makes him want to buy his books because he's giving us so much value. So that's how he uses reciprocity. Next is commitment and consistency. So this would be things when he's like, subscribe to the channel, follow, like that sort of things. Like anyone who's following him, that's kind of a commitment to continue watching his stuff. If, for example, you went onto his website, sign up for his email list, that would be a way to commit to consistently watching Andrew Huberman. Next is authority. I don't know if you guys have watched his episodes, but at the beginning, pretty much every episode he says, I'm like a neuroscientist professor at Stanford. I forget exactly what it is, but he definitely mentions that he is a professor at Stanford at every opportunity. And why? Because Stanford is a big brand with a lot of authority, and he leverages that for sure. Also, his guest episodes, he kind of uses the influence of other bigger creators as a means of authority as well. Next, we have likeness. So the people that are in Huberman's niche, why he is able to communicate to his niche so well is because he is that niche. I think it's very powerful to have a business of people who, like, of customers who are like you, because you are able to truly understand them. And he for sure is someone who's very passionate about health, wellness, and then academia as well. So he is very much like his audience, or he is at least very much like who they want to be. Pretty cool. Anyways, next we have social proof. So social proof he's kind of built up over time. Obviously, you go to his page now and it's like, you see that he has 6 million followers. You're like, all right, he's probably got something good to say, right? Anyone with a massive amount of influence like that, I don't care what you say. Anyone with that much influence has something to say that you should probably listen to or at least learn from, you know what I mean? So definitely that means of social proof is very, very powerful for him. And that is something that the bigger you get, the bigger you benefit. It's almost like an investment that just... So that's how he uses social proof, kind of almost inadvertently. But then lastly, let's talk about scarcity and urgency, because honestly, he doesn't really use these principles either on purpose. I would say the biggest element of scarcity and urgency is from the topic itself that he's talking about, right? He's talking about health. We have one life to live, only so much time to accomplish everything that we want to accomplish. And so by giving us information to better utilize our one life, that kind of has scarcity and urgency inherently in it. But he doesn't automatically use these tactics. When someone automatically uses like scarcity and urgency, that would be things like a 7-day sale or buy now before it's gone. He doesn't do that. But it's definitely worth noting just so you know all 6 of these principles. Next, I want to talk about Andrew Huberman's lead magnets. And for those of you who don't know what a lead magnet is, it's basically something that you get for free that other people normally charge for, that makes them realize that they have a bigger problem that pretty much only you can solve. Or at that point, they trust you enough to believe that you're the person who can solve it best. Andrew Huberman, obviously the podcast again. Huge lead magnet. The podcast facilitates pretty much his entire marketing strategy. You would think that the podcast is the product, but no. The podcast is the lead magnet. It's what sets up all of this stuff. So his lead magnet for us is the podcast. And then also if you go onto his website, you can just put in your email, and that's like a lead capture on his website, and you get his daily morning routine, which is, I actually read it. I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. I might try it. But those are his 2 lead magnets as far as I'm aware of. Last but not least, I want to talk about Andrew Huberman's social strategy. Now, there are 2 ways you can go about a social strategy when you are starting. You can go for width and then depth, or depth and then width. This stuff, again, comes from Alex Hormozi. But the strategy, let me explain the difference first. So width and then depth would be if you went for a bunch of social platforms and slowly got better at them. Depth and then width is going for one platform, getting good at it, and then going for another platform, getting good at that, and so on until you have that width. For Andrew Huberman, I know that he started on Instagram. So his strategy to me looks like depth and then width. But we're going to talk about the different platforms that he uses now and kind of how he uses them, so you can take inspiration from whatever one you want to start on. So obviously he uses YouTube for his podcast. So he has 2 YouTube channels actually. He's got the Huberman Lab for his main podcast. Then he's also got a separate clips channel, which is something that I've noticed in the really big podcasts that they started doing. And what this does is, obviously the clips, they're shorter. So someone who doesn't know him would be like, oh, this 7-minute clip on how to solve this very specific problem that I have. And they watch it and they're like, oh, he seems cool. And then they go see a longer episode. So I thought it was interesting how he had those 2 different channels. Also, his thumbnails on his main channel and on his clips channel, they're very clear. And they all have his face on them. They're very, very similar in how they are, but they're very clear, which is so important, right? I think I see a lot of different content creators, and I used to do this as well, where we have this metaphor and we're like, oh, this is so beautiful, and this is such a cool title, and this is clever. Clever is not as good as clear, and Andrew Huberman is very clear. Next, I want to talk about his engagement strategy as well, because I found this interview from like 2 or 3 years ago. He was on My First Million. I don't think he probably engages with his comments as much anymore. There are just too many people. But I'm going to play this clip so you can see what his engagement strategy used to be.
But YouTube comments are, on the whole, either funny or supportive or whatnot. They really changed that. TikTok's doing it. But anyways, I want to
one
switch
thing about
topics.
comments, just before I forget, sorry to interrupt, but vis-a-vis business, because I know that's your main audience, is one thing that I did on Instagram early on and that I do on YouTube is comment sections are great, but better to make them interactive. So I actively request, and we read every single comment. I say, tell me, like, give us feedback, but also give us suggestions and give us ideas about future podcasts. And then I've devoted entire episodes. We haven't done one in a while, but to what we call office hours, which is where I go through the most frequently asked questions and address those. So now there's an incentive to ask, to put stuff in the comments. And I think that's a really good non-combative use of the comment section. And we, of course, still get some crazy stuff in the comments and people being combative, but they should just know that we don't actually read those. No, I'm kidding. We read them all.
Yeah, for sure. So I wanted to talk about a couple things. One was what we talked about now.
So from that clip, you can probably gather that early on in your social media journey, what I would do is engage as much as possible. It's like if you're having a conversation with someone and they just talk at you the whole time, you kind of want to like jump off a bridge, right? And then it's the same thing with social media. I would want to be talked to and ask questions as much as possible. He used to have those things called office hours, so definitely engagement was a really crucial part of his social strategy early on Instagram and on YouTube. So next I want to talk about Instagram because, like I said, that is the first platform that I think that he used. And he's got around 6 million followers on there. If we look at the content that he uses, he heavily promotes the podcast on there. Those are a lot of his posts. But some of them are more just, if you watched it by itself, it would create some value, you know what I mean? So he lists out steps, which is really great. He always has a hook. And then he always has a call to action as well. But his call to actions, I would say they could be a bit stronger. He puts the link in the bio of his Instagram. I mean, in the captions of his Instagram, which you can't click on. I have a feeling that he should be posting more stories or something. And the reason that I say that, obviously he's doing well on Instagram, right? But his posts could convert better. And how I know that they could convert better is because barely any traffic from his website is driven on there. So definitely he could do some more promoting of his website on Instagram. But that being said, most of the call to actions are to his podcast itself, and the podcast is converting to the website. Maybe he could mix it up a bit more, but honestly, he's doing fine, so whatever. Next, we have LinkedIn. So he's got around 1 million followers on LinkedIn, and his LinkedIn content, again, is just mostly promoting the podcast. Wait, let's look. I had it up. Yeah, his LinkedIn is interesting because it's kind of Twitter-like. He does promote his podcast and stuff on there as well. But yeah, he just links to the website a lot, and on the thing that, yeah, he uses LinkedIn to just promote his stuff and ask questions. I don't know, his LinkedIn strategy is interesting to me. I can't really make sense of it. It would be, if I were him, I would talk a little bit more about how these things could maybe relate to the workplace, just because that's kind of what people on LinkedIn like to read, but that's not really his podcast either. So it would make sense that LinkedIn would be a less strong platform for him, but good on him for using it. Maybe he could talk about like health in the workplace, just really double down on the productivity episodes.
If you need to record anything over the internet.
Okay, sorry about that. So next is Twitter. So like I said, Andrew Huberman hasn't posted on Twitter since 2023. He's mentioned on a few different interviews that he doesn't actually like the combativeness of Twitter, but I found this one tweet that I think aged really well, so I just want to put it on the screen and just not say anything else about Twitter. Okay, so moving on. This isn't exactly social media, but I just want to talk about his website again because that's how he kind of lead captures. He's got blog posts on there that provide additional value, and that's how eventually people become members. So he's got around 3.3 million people being driven to his site every single year, and yeah, he has good practices in terms of on the homepage. He has that lead capture, and overall his website is well done, it's on brand, and yeah, it's overall pretty good. So now to his future ambitions and my predictions. So my prediction is that he will continue to build out podcasts for other people. It seems like he's quite good at that. I read in another Time article about him that he is thinking about going into politics at some point. So I think that'll be interesting how he leverages his audience for that if he ends up doing that. But I had to mention that because I'm like, that'd be wild. Could you imagine Andrew Huberman is like a governor, like Arnold Schwarzenegger? That would be crazy. But yeah, it really goes to show that once you have an audience as well, once you have a strong personal brand, kind of the options are endless, you know? And it's like, Kylie Jenner became a billionaire because she was able to launch to an existing fan base. Like, so many celebrities utilize this, so why can't academics start, right? Get good quality information out there. All right, so what can you take away from this? If we look back at Andrew Huberman's entire strategy, definitely what he did was he leveraged his existing knowledge. Like I said, he knew exactly what kind of problems he was solving because it seems like he solved them for himself, right? How to be productive, how to be healthy, etc. He had mentors and friends within the space that he was trying to get into. He guested and he collaborated a ton, and then he provided really high quality free content. The world judges us on what we do for free. So whatever you do, when you put it out there, make it your best. I mean, when you start making content, it might be bad, and that's okay because no one's watching you. But if you've got eyeballs on you, make sure that you're not holding back on the value that you provide. It's just, people are going to judge you on what you give for free. And if you take one thing away from this video, please take away that. Anyways, so an action step that you can take away if you are just starting is to figure out your niche and your mission, because the reason that people resonate so strong with Andrew Huberman is he knows who he is and he knows why he wants to do what he does. Figuring that out for you, it might take some time, but if you have a base idea, you're going to be so much further than a lot of people. And if you can niche down 4 levels, and I know it's really hard because it seems like there's this world of opportunities, and if you niche down, you're giving up something else. But the more specific you are, if you're smaller, the better it is. For example, my niche is higher education professionals and content marketing. There are so many content marketers. There aren't many content marketers marketing for higher education, and it really helps inform my content and what I do. So that is it for Andrew Huberman's marketing strategy. If you are watching this, you're an academic who wants to know how well you're promoting your research, I have a free research quiz down below. If you're someone who wants to get started into content, I also have a free 7-day content challenge below. And yeah, hope you enjoyed. Make sure to follow, like, and subscribe. See you next time.